Forced displacement is an involuntary or coerced movement of a person or people away from their home or home region. The UNHCR defines forced displacement as follows. Displaced, as a result of persecution, conflict, generalized violence or human rights violations. A forcibly displaced person may also be referred to as a forced migrant, a displaced person, or, if displaced within the home country, an internally displaced person. While some displaced persons may be considered as refugees, the latter term specifically refers to such displaced persons who are receiving legally defined protection and are recognized as such by their country of residence and/or international organizations. Forced displacement has gained attention in international discussions and policy making since the European migrant crisis. This has since resulted in a greater consideration of the impacts of forced migration on affected regions outside Europe. Various international, regional, and local organizations are developing and implementing approaches to both prevent and mitigate the impact of forced migration in the previous home regions as well as the receiving or destination regions. Additionally, some collaboration efforts are made to gather evidence in order to seek prosecution of those involved in causing events of man-made forced migration. Approximately over 60 million people may be considered forcibly displaced since the onset of the 21st century, with the majority coming from the global south. Governments, NGOs, other international organizations and social scientists have defined forced displacement in a variety of ways. They have generally agreed that it is the forced removal or relocation of a person from their environment and associated connections. It can involve different types of movements, such as flight, evacuation, and population transfer. Quote, refugee studies is the academic discipline or field of study covering the research of refugees and their experience seeking refuge, including the causes of their displacement and ability to find refuge. Several categories of individuals are included in this field, labeled as follows: refugee, expellee, exile, displaced person, internally displaced person, economic migrant, humanitarian refugee, stateless person, tsunami refugee, development refugee, environmental refugee, government-assisted refugee, etc. The term displaced person was first widely used during World War II, following the subsequent refugee outflows from Eastern Europe. In this context, DP specifically referred to an individual removed from their native country as a refugee, prisoner or a slave laborer. Most war victims, political refugees, and DPs of the immediate post-Second World War period were Ukrainians, Poles, other Slavs, and citizens of the Baltic states who refused to return to Soviet-dominated Eastern Europe. A.J. Jaffe claimed that the term was originally coined by Eugene M. Kulischer. The meaning has significantly broadened in the past half-century. Bogomil Terminsky distinguishes two general categories of displacement. Forced displacement may directly result from natural disasters and indirectly from the subsequent impact on infrastructure, food and water access, and local, regional economies. Displacement may be temporary or permanent, depending on the scope of the disaster and the area's recovery capabilities. Climate change is increasing the frequency of major natural disasters, possibly placing a greater number of populations in situations of forced displacement. Also, crop failures due to blight and/or pests fall within this category by affecting people's access to food. Additionally, the term environmental refugee represents people who are forced to leave their traditional habitat because of environmental factors which negatively impact their livelihood, or even environmental disruption, i.e. biological, physical or chemical change in ecosystem. Migration can also occur as a result of slower onset climate change, such as desertification or sea level rise, of deforestation or land degradation. Man-made displacement describes forced displacement caused by political entities, criminal organizations, conflicts, man-made environmental disasters, development, etc. Although impacts of natural disasters and blights, pests may be exacerbated by human mismanagement, man-made causes refer specifically to those initiated by humans. According to UNESCO, armed conflict stands as the most common cause behind forced displacement, reinforced by regional studies citing political and armed conflict as the largest attributing factors to migrant outflows from Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Displaced persons face adverse conditions when taking the decision to leave, traveling to a destination, and sometimes upon reaching their destination. Displaced persons are often forced to place their lives at risk, travel in inhumane conditions, and may be exposed to exploitation and abuse. These